Hi, everybody. Today we're going to cover letters of intent or LOIs. And what is a letter of intent? Well, a letter of intent is typically a non-binding document that outlines the framework for an understanding between two or more parties. This document also implies that the parties will work together to formalize a legally binding agreement. In real estate, letters of intent are used in the acquisition of property, the leasing of properties, and also with financing. For our purposes in this video, we're going to cover a letter of intent that is used to acquire multifamily and commercial real estate in the US. And the purpose of a letter of intent is really to get a meeting of the minds between the parties that will be transacting. So a seller and a buyer of property, a landlord and a lessee, a lender and a borrower. So these are some examples. And a lot of people might say, well, how do you even write a letter of intent or an LOI? And the way I look at it is assuming that a particular deal is in line with your investment thesis and that the returns meet your return expectations. After doing that initial analysis, you'll want to draft this letter of intent. But a letter of intent really addresses the main points that will be used to draft a purchase and sale agreement, assuming that the parties reach agreement on the LOI. So we have an example of a non-binding letter of intent that we use that's available to our members of the Passive Real Estate Investor Wealth Club. And so you can access that as part of your bonus materials when you become a member. But getting into a letter of intent, I figured I'd share a document with you so that you can at least take a look at what we do and what we have found to be effective. As you can see, a letter of intent here is really just a business letter. And what you want to do is make sure you include your contact information, include the date, and include who the letter is going to be addressed to. So in this case, the broker name right here. You also want to describe the property. So you want to give a little bit of indication of what's the name of the property, where's it located, what city and state is it in, and then you start writing the letter. And inside the letter, you need to put in the details, including the purchase price that you have. You want to also, with the purchase price that you're comfortable paying, you'll want to include what your earnest deposits are going to be, your due diligence time periods, and you'll also want to have any contingencies that you have, the responsibilities for who's going to be drafting the purchase and sale agreement, when you expect to get it, when you are going to review title, when you expect to have a title report produced, and when you should be receiving it by, and then some of your closing conditions. But one of the big items that you really want to cover, and this really depends on the type of deal that you're doing, but you do want to have a good chunk of due diligence requirements inside your LOI. And that way you're letting the seller know, hey, this is what I want to look at. These are the things that are important to me. I want to look at the leases. I want to look at the rent roll. I want to make sure that the leases match the rent roll. I want to get historic profit and loss statements. And so that can be the past 2 years plus year to date. You also want to get copies of property tax statements. You want to get development costs, if that makes sense. You want to see any communications that they've had with the city and the municipality. You also want to get any third-party reports that they have, whether that's environmental reports, whether that's engineering reports, whether it's mechanical reports, roofing reports, anything related to floods or seismic. If it's in a flood or a seismic zone, you'd want to see those. It's also important to get copies of the site plan at the property. And if you can, it'd be good to get a certificate of occupancy that is usually issued by the municipality. And then you want to get any surveys that were done on the property. You don't always need surveys with the title report, but it is important to try and get as much of this due diligence as possible. Then you're also going to want to look at any employment agreements that they may have, or service contracts or maintenance contracts that may survive closing. So that's an important one for you as well. And then you want them to just provide these reports so that you can review it. Now, if you have to do new reports, that's generally going to be at your cost, but at least you have some of the historical reports, and that may help with the engineers that you decide to work with, or even with your appraiser, or even with your lender. One of the most important things after detailing what you want in terms of due diligence is also letting the seller know what your expected due diligence time periods are. So in a lot of cases, I try to get 30 days of due diligence when I'm doing something. And that's going to include my physical inspections. That's going to be reviews of all of the documents related to the property. And that will also be for any tenant interviews. And so that's an important number to get. And I try to do it from the date that all of the documents are delivered, not from the signing of the document, because sometimes the important documents, you don't want a seller to lag or say that they had a document and then not get it to you, and then you're waiting for that document. You want to get all the documents and then have your due diligence clock start thereafter. Another thing that I do is concurrently, you're going to be trying to work with your lenders as well and trying to line up the best financing possible for the acquisition. And one of the things I'm doing right now is I am really trying to get 60-day financing contingencies. And the reason is that this has been a time period where lenders have slowed down a little bit. Not everybody is working in their office. You need to coordinate with all the different vendors and all the different report providers. All of that is taking time. And so I want to make sure my financing's in place. And if my financing's not in place, you don't want to have to scramble or write a big check at the end of the closing period, or, God forbid, lose your deposit because you couldn't close. So I try and get longer financing contingencies so that I have a reasonable time period to close. And then once you have the financing contingency removed, I say, we'll close no later than 15 days thereafter. So at least you have this built in. If things are taking longer, maybe you can get extensions. But the point is that you try and do the best that you can for yourself while also being reasonable with the seller. And then we also cover some of these, like how the closing costs are paid. And usually that's just customary as for the county and the state. And sometimes we'll break that out if it's not quite clear what the customary approach is. A lot of times, in addition to doing this, we have a letter of intent and we say the expiration date. So today I'm writing this on the 22nd, and this is a 4-day review period. So that gives the seller 4 days to review my letter of intent and decide whether this is something that they would be interested in pursuing. And if they are, I want them to agree to these terms by the 26th. That gives them 4 days. It's reasonable. And then I don't want them to be negotiating with anybody for 14 calendar days after we've agreed to this LOI, because at that point, we're going to be expending time and energy to put a purchase and sale agreement together, whether it's us doing the purchase and sale agreement or whether it's the seller. And that's based on your preference. Some people like to have a seller draft a PSA, and some people like to draft their own PSA. And we have done both. But generally, I think we prefer to at least do the initial draft of the PSA. And our PSAs are reasonable. They're neither buyer friendly nor seller friendly, but they try to be fairly neutral. And then what we also do is we like to include an appendix of the properties that we've purchased in the past to show that we've closed on a number of transactions, especially if we're transacting in a new market or with a new broker that we've never worked with. And so we'll put a list of properties down here that we've transacted in, and then try and get that as a show of our reputation and our ability to close. On that note, I hope you enjoyed this video on letters of intent, and we'd be happy to do an even deeper dive. But if you want access to our letter of intent as a draft, and you want to get more education on these topics, feel free to join the Passive Real Estate Investor Wealth Club, and we'd be happy to have you as a member. We provide ideas, strategies, and investment opportunities that you will also have access to as a member. Thanks so much, and look forward to seeing you on the next video.